So globally, aging and declining fertility rate has become a major development concern. And even among developing economies like the Philippines, we have to contend with the demographic shifts that's happening in our country. And rightly so, because demographic trends or shift has an impact on economic development, financial sustainability, social security, our consumption pattern, our healthcare systems. And probably one of the issues that are not usually discussed is the relevance of demographic trends or shifts in the housing market. So actually, it has a significant, it impacts on the housing market in a significant way. And so that's the focus of this paper's discussion. How does that happen? So next slide, please. So this gives you a very simplified illustration showing the direction of change and factors influencing the process between demographics and the housing market. So demographic trends actually arise from social and economic factors that influence the behavior of individuals with regards marriage, with regards having children, uh, labor markets, and as well as actually advances in science and technology, which contributes to the um, improvement in mortality and longer lifespan. So these demographic trends have large direct effect on the rate and household formation. So that's the second box, lower box, the rate as well as the structure of the household, which are actually the key factors that shape your housing market. However, the relationship is not unilateral because housing market also influence the rate as well as structure of household formation. For instance, the access to, if there's an easy access to housing, then it gives incentive to form new households. But increased in the number of household also means it will put a pressure uh, on housing prices because of increased demand. So I was looking at the poll and it says independence near work. So these are reasons why uh, young adults, working adults, move out of their homes. But that might not be that might be easier said than done because you have to contend with what is the where you're going to go or what is the housing that's available for you in the market. So this relationship between household formation, demographics, and the housing market is actually they interact with each other. The other thing to note is that aging and rising life expectancy, as well as probably decline in fertility, has a direct effect uh, not only in the demand within the population group, which is your elderly cohort, but it also impacts on the housing choices of different age group. What does this mean? So this means that aging affects not only the housing choices of the elderly, but it will also affect intra-housing decisions. So very important in housing policy because housing policy affects the housing market affects also household formation. So these are how this is the flow of influence or of uh, in the relating demographics as well as housing. So next slide, please. So how does this framework applies in the case of the Philippines? So I think we already mentioned about the objectives of the study. Let me go to the next slide. Okay. So if you look at the data, the Philippines is still in the early stages of demographic transition. So the guideline is that if your elderly population is about 10% and above, 9 to 19%, you're already starting the uh, transition to that's second demographic phase transition. In the Philippines, we're about still below that, but the projection is that by 2030 we will already be starting the demographic transition towards aging society. So in fact, you can already discern the significant changes in the age structure of population. So from a wide base in the 1980, that's the blue uh, colored box there, to the narrowing of the base in 2020 and further narrowing of the base by 2040. In fact, in the next 10 years, the World Bank in 2018 projected that the increases in the population will come from the age group that has largely completed its child rearing years. So ito yung mga 34, 35 up, and those age 65 years and over. Okay. So how does it look in terms of the rural and urban population pattern? Okay, so next slide, please. So we don't really see much difference in the trend from the 1990s or probably even the 1980s. So if what we see obviously is the lower slope in 2020. This is the solid lines, depicting the decline in population for both rural and urban areas. What we also observe here in the solid lines is that birth rates are actually happening mostly in the rural areas. So that is the orange solid line. So it's above. So there are a lot of new births are happening in those areas. But when the at the age of 15 to 19, that's actually your working age population as we defined it in the labor market, then we see a migration of the rural population to urban areas. So it's uh, still NCR is the main destination, but now to a lesser degree compared to the 1990s. And this is largely due to the expansion or the spread of urbanization in areas outside the NCR. So the result of this migration is the leveling in the distribution of adult population in the rural and urban areas. For the elderly that's above 65 or 65 to 6 and above, we see also there's actually already a observed slight rise in the proportion of those 65 in rural areas, mainly probably because of longevity among seniors in the rural areas. But there's also we can already see, but still not noticeable, reverse migration after retirement. So this migration and population movement is relevant as it influences housing market at the local level. So we always say that the housing market really is localized. So maybe the need in the rural areas is different from that of urban areas, and among urban areas there could also be differences in the market. So what has been the next slide, please? What has been the effect of the change in the structure of population to as I showed earlier? First, we look at household formation. So we note that, of course, there's already a decrease in the population, there's also a decline in the rate of household formation, and there's even a further decline in the rate of we call this family type households. So ito yung there's related they are uh, relatives or related individuals in a residence. And actually later on we will show that non-family type households like living alone, living with non-related persons are on the rise. And these are actually responses to both the demographics as well as housing market dynamics. Next slide, please. So when we talk about new household formation, this is where actually we see what is the rate of new household formation. Because of course, if you're already a household, if you're already married or a separate household by the age of 25, then it's expected that by 40, 50, you will also be already a household. So what we're interested in is the formation or the rate of formation of household among young adults. And in the literature, this is usually reflected among ages 25 to 35. That is considered up to 34, which is the age range or the age cohort that is commonly used to depict new household formation, as majority of the population or households had at that age are less sensitive to short-term market conditions. And this can also be adopted in the Philippines, whereby we see that the young generation complete their university or college education between ages 20 and 23 years old, and usually reach the age of independence. And ano naman yung independence between ages 25 and 30. So uh, the expectation is these are those who would form new household, uh, move out of their former residence to form new household. But the graph shows that there has been a slowdown in the rate of household formation from the 1980 to the 2020. And I think the 1980, this age group, 25 to 34, about 73% of the population is a household head or spouse. So either or. By age 34. Uh, in 2020, the same age cohort, only 59% of population is a household head. So we see a slowdown in the rate of household formation. So from a housing perspective, what is the implication of this? The older household head imply that other things uh, equal, the decision to form new household appears to be happening at a later date, which could have an impact on the child bearing years as well as the size of your household. Okay? And also, of course, your demand for housing. Uh, okay. The next slide, please. I think if we really look at demographic shifts as well, expectantly, because fertility rates are declining, are lower, then that's the expected effect in terms of the household structure. The size of household are lower, and effectively we see that in the data. But actually, we still have a third of population that's living in household of size 6 and above. So despite a significant drop in the TFR, your total fertility rate from the uh, you still see that there is a large uh, uh, there is a significant at least 30% of household that are of population, I mean, that live in a bigger household. And that's both urban and rural. In This is the actually the dynamics is different in the 1970s 80s, because at that time there's this study by Steiner that looks at bigger households in the urban area because of the migration. But apparently there is now a leveling off, and we see that this is both an influence not only of the demographics but also the housing market. So, okay, next. So, although, yeah, so here we see the interaction between demographics and the housing market. So, we see that there's still a significant number of household or population staying in bigger household, but there is also a preference for small size households in both rural and urban areas. And we see this as a response actually to more affordable housing. You need the units are small size, even apartments now are small size. They Because it is more affordable. But to address the housing size, it means you also have to have smaller households. So there could be preference only for one or two people staying in the household. And this is also implication on the type of household that is being formed in recent years. So there is a lot of uh, sharing, shared housing that is uh, happening. So the shared housing can either be living in with more relatives in a bigger household, living with unrelated or non-related house individuals, or living with only one or alone or living alone. And next slide would show you that you have rising. This is reflected actually in three aspects. One is the rising, the increase or the rising preference for living alone. That's one. Then there is the rising extended multi-family household, which is could be another response to housing constraints. So shared household, and the rising uh, residency of living together of non-related individuals. Okay. So while and this is shown, next slide please, in all for all age group. So there, while the nuclear families, this is the orange colored bar for the 25 years old, is still dominant for the younger cohorts. We see that there's a rise of living alone among these ages, as well as and this actually the proportion of nuclear families actually is reduced as you go older, and a rise in the extended family. Okay. The other next slide, please. Uh, the other um, aspect that we see in terms of the dynamics of uh, demographics and housing is that space sufficiency. So although we have improved the housing space per unit over time between 2010, at least in the last decade, there, there is still a, um, the the space sufficiency is still a constraint for big size family households. And that's why it is lowest in the case of extended and multi-family household. And it also shows that there is still a significant about 35% to 40% of household that is living in a congested situation, whether for all types, whether you are in nuclear, extended, or multi families household. So yung mga alone lang and non-related, this is where there is an improvement in space. The next, in terms of a coping strategy that I think is also shown in the this longitudinal study is that there is an increase of percentage of workers in that work in place different from their place of residence, and that is actually rising even for NCR and 28%. This does not include foreign working in foreign countries, as against 17% in 2000. So in just a period of 2 decades. So this implies that either the arrangement could be you're going to your work in a temporary housing arrangement in the areas where you work or places of work, or you commute to your place of work, which is uh, actually we see that with a lot of probably easier through the motorbikes, through the availability of motorbike systems. So um, but there is also, of course, a social implication of this, because it means that your children are left to your relatives most of the time. There is less quality time with the children, because you cannot find a place in the city where you can accommodate a family type household. So next, okay, so so we try to estimate what is the demand for home ownership, and indeed we just use age as the predictor of the quantity of housing demanded. This is not to measure the true coefficient of age, but really to assess how changes in the age structure would impact on aggregate demand. So what we see is that uh, the demand for home ownership is really when you reach actually a certain age, and this is actually the higher, but it's a rising uh, slope, meaning that it's usually among older age cohort where you have a higher demand for home ownership, and those in the ages 20s 30s would have little impact on home ownership demand. And actually, the vertical axis actually is the imputed rent value. And you will see, you could actually use this to see what is uh, the like an amortization value that they could that this age group would be able to afford. So uh, there is, of course, a very positive correlation. I think what is different in other countries is that there is no inflection point. So it also actually reflects low attainability of home housing ownership in the case of uh, most individuals. So usually attainability comes only at the age of, I mean, if you're talking of a 3 million household, you can be able to attain that. That's based on 2018 prices at the age of around 33 to 45 years old. That's the 2018. Uh, um, that's the gray line there. So so that's actually what's we're seeing it. So demand for home ownership is low, is not does not have much impact when you're looking at the younger age cohort, 25 to 35, 34 probably, and probably you could provide some depending on the value of the household, then there increases the demand for home ownership increases at the age of 30, 35 to 45, and until probably you are on your 50s. So rise pa rin yung demand for that. And it actually also signifies low attainability. So that's why when next slide please. That's why when you look at the pattern of ownership by age group, you see that this is highest when you're already at the 46 to 66 and above 65. So yan yung mga owners natin at those ages. Next slide, please. This is, we also look at for rental housing, and obviously we see here that rental housing is just really a temporary uh, relief housing accommodation, and uh, there is actually a ceiling in which you household or individuals, the population, is willing to pay for 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 rental, and that is regardless of your age. Note that age is also a predictor of wealth, of education, of marriage. So you can already deduce some implications on that. Okay, and I think this my last slide. Next slide, please. Conclusion. So the Philippines is actually still in a demographic sweet spot. We have more working adults, which is actually good for economic development. So about 64% of Filipinos are between the ages 15 to 64. And therefore, this is actually an opportunity for government to come up with some kind of a framework on how to serve the needs of this population, the housing needs of this population. Shelter inadequacies can hasten the Philippine transition to aging economy, as limited access to decent housing could affect household formation and decisions to having children. So it can be a constraint for you to have children, so that affects fertility. It can also be a constraint for you to move out of your household, and that could affect your decision for the rate of household formation. Um, yeah, okay. That's the last 2 points is that the housing problem in cities actually can endanger, especially of the working population, can endanger family institutions and can cause psychological children have impact on children's psychosocial development, which could be a cause of rising health and social problems in society. And actually this uh, shifts that we are looking at is a call for government to act on the housing problem. We have a rising backlog in the midst of, I should say, oversupply of condominiums and problem of vacancy rates in public socialized housing. And therefore, the question is, are we doing the right thing in terms of policies? So that with that, I will end my presentation and move to the next paper.